Today I'm bringing you some information that has come from a range of professional development and research projects I've been involved in for, I could say, over the last 20 years, that'll date me, but more so since the work of the National Curriculum Exemplars, also the work I did as the role of a national evaluator in the Assess to Learn projects that went for 8 years or so. Then more recently work I did last year, and so I want to acknowledge and thank the Ministry for funding the work in the National Curriculum Exemplars, but last year work on moderation. Some of you may have seen up on TKI moderation series, some PowerPoint series that were developed for use in staff meetings. You can use those either as a series or one-off ones. And so I draw very much from that work on moderation and a study we did last year, colleague Kerry Mitchell and I did, looking at overall teacher judgments. So that's what I draw on. Also, I come here standing wearing, in many ways, multiple hats. I mean, my current role at the moment is Director of the Graduate School of Education at Massey University. But I was originally a primary teacher and taught in the Manawatu and Wellington regions. So I'm still very grounded, especially given a couple of factors, that a lot of my research is still in classrooms. My husband and I have 3 children, and they span ages of 7 to 15, so very much wear that parent hat too, right across the sector, and I have also been a Board of Trustee member. So I hope that you can see some of those different strands come through today. We are in an environment of the national standards, but I also want to reiterate what was said, that this is even more. The message I really want you to take away today, that it's about quality teacher judgments and how we can use them to benefit our students. Ultimately, judgments can be, OTJs, can be used for accountability and for improvement. And we know there's an accountability element in the context at the moment, here in New Zealand but also internationally. But more so I want to focus your attention on the improvement, the opportunities that we can have to grow ourselves as teachers, but also the learning of our students and how we can link into our strategic school plans. So let's see if I can be successful in conveying those messages today. The key messages are what's involved in making quality overall teacher judgments, what do we know about New Zealand teachers' views on that, and how might a moderation framework help us. We're fortunate that the Australians have had a bit of practice at this ahead of us, so we've learnt from them. In Queensland they've had the last 5 to 8 years quite a bit of work on overall teacher judgments, and we can learn about that and moderation. In fact, you'll see that threaded through the presentation today. There's a lot of literature out there supporting teacher judgments, and I just want to say we are very fortunate to be in a country where we are not only allowed to make overall teacher judgments, but that is the cornerstone of current policy, that we as professionals are trusted with the judgment. Making overall teacher judgments is a really complex business because you know, particularly as primary teachers, you are with the children, you know, at least 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, and so many weeks throughout the year. You are gathering information all the time about children. I used to really enjoy being out in the playground because I would gather all sorts of other incidental information about my children as well. But from the minute they walk in, you're observing, you're looking at their body language, you're watching their interactions with other students, you're continually making judgments, adjusting your teaching, looking for that teachable moment, adjusting. You know that as good teachers, if you had planned an assessment, you see that a child over there is upset, you'll either modify that assessment or adjust the timing. You're doing that all the time as professionals. Now, the key to professional judgments is knowing what to bring together and what to trust in that data, and we'll work through that today. But Wyatt Smith, Elkins and Neville really value teachers as professionals because you're bringing that whole wealth of information. It's continuous and it's a range. Rather than the traditional test that is only a moment in time, you're gathering information all the time. So that's why it's wonderful that in New Zealand we are trusted to make those sort of judgments. So what are the key elements of a teacher judgment? Well, Royce Sadler's done a lot of work in formative assessment. He's based in Australia. and he's identified 3 key elements to teacher judgments. A key point here is teachers attending to the learning students produce, and that's really looking for patterns. You're looking to see if they're spelling, what are the pattern errors, what's the key learning that's needed here. You're looking to see, what knowledge they're bringing. As a teacher, you know when children are making connections between a science lesson and English lesson that you might have had earlier in the week or last week. You can see the leaps they're making. You can say, wow, that child's really doing it exceptionally well in their depth of understanding in that topic, or oh, we need to just do a little bit more groundwork there. So that's what it means about attending to the learning, looking for those patterns, looking for where further reinforcement or extension might be needed. The second element, and I've got it in red because you'll see this theme coming through today, appraising that work against a reference framework. Now at the moment our reference framework really is pretty much the New Zealand curriculum, and the national standards are linked into the New Zealand curriculum. Some schools will use, there's a range of reference frameworks you can use. Some use the literacy progressions, the numeracy framework, etc., etc. There are a number, but the ultimate one really is the New Zealand curriculum. The difficulty with it is it's so generic, and it has to be so that it can accommodate schools in Invercargill, Stewart Island, right through to Auckland, a range of deciles and country and urban settings. But it gives us the freedom to interpret it in our school context, but also there's a little bit of onus there. Are we interpreting it correctly? Are we getting it right in terms of our expectations? So that's where the reference framework comes in as an anchor point to ensure that our expectations are in line with what would be across New Zealand. Sometimes that's more of a challenge if we're in a rural school and we've only got a small number of students at a particular age or stage. We're not sure whether our expectations are in keeping with the rest of the country. Now there are times when it's useful to, at times it's not. It's more that we need an anchor point, and that's where it's important to have a reference framework such as it might be the National Curriculum Exemplars, that they were based on the curriculum before it was revised. It may be aspects like STAR, all sorts of norms, but I'll come back to that point. The other key element is what we do about that information, what we do about that judgment. Sure, we have to report it, but the key thing, particularly at primary, is what it means to inform our ongoing learning and teaching. So the benefits of having teacher judgments, as opposed to just having a standard test or a one-off test, etc., is it can bring that range of information. We can respond immediately to a student. We can use recent information and information we've gathered from group work, something we've noticed in assembly, something we saw in the playground, whether it's some social skills that need developing, whatever it might be. So we can draw on that wide range of informal and formal assessments. It also helps us clarify our expectations and to check that whether my expectations as a teacher are similar to other teachers of students at this sort of age and stage. But it's not all good news. There are some issues with teacher judgments, and this is what they found in Queensland and what we found with the work I've done. There's some uncertainty about standards. What are standards? How do we interpret them? There's variable understanding of assessments. You know yourselves, if you assess a child on one, even doing running records, and we may all do it the same way, but one book will really excite a child and they'll really show deep understanding. Another book, they're not interested. It doesn't resonate with their experiences. So we may not get a true, accurate indication of where that child's at. There's also a culture of scepticism. Now I would say, how many of us, if we have a new child come into our school or into our classroom, gather some more assessments? We may not, we're now in a climate where we will tend to use the information from the other teacher or other schools more than we did when I was in the classroom. But we often just make sure with our own assessments, don't we? Now some of it can be starting with a clean slate, a new context, etc. But I would just sow that seed to you. How trusting are you of other teachers' judgments, particularly teachers from other schools? And I know if we did a sort of a straw poll or something, it would vary. There's also that challenge for us as primary teachers, that generalist versus specialist knowledge. I know myself as a teacher, I wanted more knowledge in how to teach writing, how to teach mathematics, etc. So it's hard for us to make and be confident in our judgments when we don't have the luxury that people like I do in a university to spend a lot of time specialising in one area. And so we do need ongoing learning about new curriculum knowledge, etc. There's time demands. You know, how most of us have 25, 30 students in a class and more, and all our other responsibilities in the school. So all that leads to a bit of inconsistency in teacher judgments. So what can we do about it? Well, work by Gardner, Tom and Wilson argue 4 key elements, and these 4 themes will keep coming through. Key thing they argue is that we need to understand what an overall teacher judgment is, to share common understandings of standards and the reference point, to inform our understandings by clear criteria and exemplars, and by using moderation processes. Well, what do we know about New Zealand teachers' overall teacher judgments? This was a study what I'm going to report today is a study I did last year. I'm about to do an update and collect some more information in the next couple months. At that stage, little was known about overall teacher judgments. We did a sampling. They were schools within the Atoll project, the Assess to Learn project. We did a sample across the country. It was based primarily on semi-structured interviews. We did have more information because they were in the Atoll project. We had achievement data, etc. But it was just to get a probe, if you like, on how people were going. The handouts you get have a lot more detail. I've condensed about 7 slides into one here. Those 4 elements down on the left-hand side that I said were important, here they come again. So what did New Zealand teachers understand in June and in November about overall teacher judgments? Well, in essence, they varied. Some thought it was reliance on classroom assessments, some thought it was just on a norm referenced assessment tool. Others varied. They wondered how much assessment was enough. Was it a point in time? Was it data collected over time? And so a lot of discussions focused more on the assessment of the overall teacher judgment rather than getting to grips with what an overall teacher judgment is. And it ranged, some of the comments ranged in the interviews from it's a gut feeling I have, right through to others saying that they drew on a range of data. So there was a wide range. Again, when you get the handout, you can read some of the comments. How common were the understandings about standards? They weren't common, they varied. They had mixed interpretations. They varied as to what assessment result to rely on, and here's a hard one. If you're looking at assessment of reading, you've got a result from running record, you've got a result from STAR, you've got a result from somewhere else, you've got children reading aloud. What do you rely on? How do you aggregate it? Those were some of the dilemmas. And to what extent were they using clear criteria and exemplars? Very rarely. Part of that's because we don't have enough exemplars, national curriculum ones, but it was also the teachers that we interviewed, and I know there's a wider range out there, it was a small group, but the teachers we interviewed weren't too sure how to use them formatively. And because the exemplars were broader and they were based very much on what students can do with help from teachers, that scaffolding, it meant that the expectations, if you like, were higher than what students might do without teachers' proximal, assistance. What did teachers think about moderation? Well, there was mixed understanding. Some people had never moderated, thought it was scary. They thought it'd be time consuming. They didn't know how to start, where to start, were worried about the impact. Others, there were 2 schools who were really deeply involved and found it really fantastic professional learning. And then to what extent were they using it? You can see there that 2 of the 10 schools were well underway and the others varied. So what can we do about it? Well, really to make sure that we have more consistent and quality overall teacher judgments, we need to do a number of things. In your school, you may need to look at helping teachers synthesise that assessment data. The inter and intra. Intra means within, so the data that might relate to me, Jenny, as a student, and the variability I spoke about before. It might also be the other students in the class. It might, if you're really well down the track with moderation, be how the class compares with, well, you're not really doing it for comparison's sake, you're doing it to make sure your judgments are in line, how they sit with other schools in your cluster. Then there's these other things. So let's work through each of these. What is moderation? There are lots of really complex definitions out there, and they're arguing about being consistent and the purpose and value. To me, the issue is it's really about confirming or adjusting your judgment. So how do we moderate? When I looked at the definition here, I thought it's more complex than it looks, so no wonder it's hard and time consuming. So to make it a bit easier, I've colour coded it. So the first bit on the left there, process, it says that it involves close collaboration. Now close collaboration implies some well developed interpersonal skills and really secure reflective professionals. Now I haven't had the experience in primary schools that you have, but I've taught in 3. One school I taught in, there was no way the professionals would open up and admit anything that they weren't too sure about, just the nature, just the climate in the school. Right through to another school where I could talk to the principal came in and out of my classroom and I could say anytime, I'm not sure about this. And I had my AP at the time, loved talking to me. I'd started doing master's study and he wasn't threatened that I was doing master's study, and he wasn't, he just loved engaging in conversation. So you have some staff who are really open to professional learning and others that are not. And we just have to be real about the sort of setting we're in, and that may be the starting point for moderation in your school, getting that right. The next element I've got in black to establish a shared understanding, and there's a lot there. It's about having deep content knowledge. So if we're looking, for example, at reading, how deep is it and how common is our understanding about stages of learning to read, about the rate, and we know even the debates in the academic world about right through from phonics, right through, all sorts of debates of how students learn. They learn in different ways, where to get started, what to focus on, what to target. There's also a range of information we need to know about assessment, about the best ways to learn, and then understanding the curriculum. But not only what's at the stage I'm teaching at, but what's come before, what's happened in Te Whareke, what's happening further up the school, so that where I've got students who are learning faster or in different ways from others, that my teaching can be flexible and adjust to those learning needs. So there's a lot there even in the content, because where there've been issues with moderation, where I've sat in on discussions, it's often one of these 4 things. All right, and it's where people talk past each other because they come from different assumptions and different backgrounds. The next bit is that green bit, understanding of standards. Now you notice that I've got it in a small s because it can be not only, I could have it in NS, big S, the national standards, and we do need to have clear understanding of that, but standards can also be the targets that we set in our school, what we understand by students reaching level 3 and what level 3 really looks like. And then of course the purple bit there, the school culture of ongoing professional learning. So really preparing for effective moderation means attending to probably at least one of those. I've yet, and if you're in a perfect school where you think you don't need to attend to any of those, please invite me so I can come and see and do some research. But chances are high that your school just needs a wee bit of tweaking in at least one of those. And if you've struggled with moderation, it could be that there could be two or more of those, that you just need a bit more focus for your professional learning. There are some moderation principles to consider. And if you get these, if you attend to these, you'll have successful moderation. Now what does Jenny mean by equity? Equity really means giving students opportunities to demonstrate their current capacity. Now let me give an example from one of my children. One of my children came home and said he'd done school-wide testing at school today, had to do a writing piece, and I said, oh, that's good, how did it go? Oh, not that well. And I said, what was the problem? He said it was a topic it didn't excite me. Had to write about his first day in year 7 at school. And he said, I wrote a better story last week. So I had a conversation with him, and it went, I won't go into the details, the poor child having a mother who's worked with exemplars, but it was really looking at the topic, the engagement of the topic was having choice. It was about what did level 4 look like, and the nature of the writing, the genre, the impact on the reader, etc. But what it made me realise was, I thought the school had done a jolly good job coming up with a topic describing your first day as a year 7 at the school, or as a first day at the school, because every child could relate to that. And it meant that as a school they could do some, that was consistent, constant, they could do some comparisons with what was expected of the writing at that stage. But it didn't maximise the opportunity to write for my child. Now he is a bit different, but so if they had, and now if you're starting on the journey of moderation, my advice is stay with that one topic. Get people familiar with the process and get the process right. But if you are on the journey of moderation, then lift it to having choice of topics, because then the students are more likely to choose something that will excite them and give them the opportunity to show you their best writing. What that means, and I'm going to jump down to comparability here and then come back to fairness, what that means is you're really looking at the characteristics of, in this case, the writing. Because in many ways it shouldn't matter what the topic is. You might want to have a similar genre of writing, but really when you're analysing that writing, you're looking for things like impact on the reader, the vocabulary, the sequence, the structure of the writing, so it doesn't matter what the topic is. So that's why having a choice, so that's what it means by performance characteristics. It's looking at those characteristics that go across any topic, any type of writing. And that's what you're looking at and comparing. I'll go back to about fairness. Fairness sometimes means doing things differently to allow students an equal chance to show what they can do. So an obvious one, if you've got a visually impaired child, you will enlarge the work, you might use a different font, you might do it with technology, and that will allow them to have an equal opportunity with their other regularly visual peers, if I can use that term, to produce what they've been asked to do. The reference point is about comparing, if you like, apples with apples. Because as that reading example before, if you're comparing a running record and you're comparing a result with that with a different book, or with star results, or looking at other sorts of tests, you'll get variable results. So reference point is something that you can compare against that will be constant, because as teachers, we are skilled at relating to students. We adjust what we say, how we say it to students, because we're continually assessing their emotional state, where they're at, whether they need a prompt, whether we need to move the lesson on, that kind of thing. We need at times though to have an objective reference point. Let me just divert for a moment about moderation, because as a teacher, when you're assessing a sample of work in front of you, you are bringing a whole lot more information about that child than appears on that piece of paper. So when you're moderating it, you might come up with a judgment that's different from another teacher who does not know that student, because you're unwittingly bringing in a whole lot of broader information. Having another colleague who's not directly involved with that student helps you see the sample of work as it stands, as it sits. Okay, so with the moderation, which is really about having conversations to either confirm or adjust your judgment, that teacher is looking at that sample or samples of work and comparing it against either the exemplar or the curriculum and making reference point and having you show where your evidence is. So it's really useful to have conversations with someone who has not taught that student but can see that sample and work and is not coloured by all that other information, because ultimately you have to come up with that judgment on that evidence there. Okay, you can argue further information and convince the other professional where need be, but I just wanted to bring that point in about the value of that. The other principle is dependability. How representative is that sample of work? The acid test I would use is, could you be pretty certain the student could produce similar work tomorrow? If you are pretty certain, and I say pretty certain because we're human and people vary from day to day, but if you're pretty sure that child can produce that work tomorrow or next week, then that is representative and typical enough. That leads me to the other key point, sufficiency. As teachers, we are extremely conscientious and really thorough, and if anything, we err on collecting too much information, analysing too much. I think we have to get real and that's why I've got this principle of sufficiency. How much is enough? How much gives you that data saturation to give you that confidence and repeatable performance? If you've got that confidence, you've got enough information, particularly if you've checked with another colleague and they can come up with a similar judgment to you. So why moderate? The key bit, I think, is to affirm your judgment, to give you confidence that you're on the right track, and then that you can, and argue, but also that you know whether you've focused your attention on the right sorts of things. The other aspect is that can improve student learning, because in professional conversations, you can learn a point that perhaps you'd overlooked, or something you hadn't thought about, or ideas for what you could do next with a student. So I've always found professional conversations, and believe me, we still do it at university as well, and particularly in the National Curriculum Exemplar project, the conversations that went on were just fantastic professional learning, the depth, the discussion about little details, about writing, about grammar, about impact on readers, etc. So it really does deepen professional learning. I've mentioned affirming and building your confidence. It's also about triangulating, and that's checking your judgments against other information. Have you got at least 3 sources so that you can be sure that the judgment is accurate? It's about increasing that consistency, overcoming any bias, because as I've said, it's all about good teaching is about relationships. And where you've got those good relationships, you're bringing in those emotional aspects as well. And at times we need to just, when we're looking at work, sometimes just put that aside, and then other times bring it in, of course. If we're doing it really smartly, we can find patterns within our classroom, if we're looking with the analytical eye, patterns are what we might need to focus on next as a teacher. And when we look at it as a team and as a school. So where can we see some common threads of what we might need to focus on next? What have we done really well? Let's celebrate what we've done well. Often as teachers we tend to beat ourselves up about the little things, because it's a 24/7 job, you can't do it all. So I want to invite you to celebrate the things that you have done well and what the children and students have done well. But also look, because we're on to lifelong learning, look at how we can improve, what we can do differently, how we can link into our strategic school goals and focus on next in our professional learning, where we might need to target our resource acquisition, etc. What makes it easier? Well, lots of things. It's attending to those principles, but it's also about planning. It does require some time. Better to do less, to do fewer, but to do it well. And I'll tell you where I would suggest that you might start if you haven't got started shortly. It's starting with that familiarity with the curriculum and what's expected at certain levels of the curriculum. Having agreed criteria. Starting with the same tasks and then later moving to those equivalents, those performance characteristics. Having clear criteria to judge samples of work, and having enough samples that you can be sure of your judgment. Having open-ended tasks so that students can surprise us with what they are doing and what they're capable of. And time to fully discuss it, and that's the real challenge, of course. So now what I want to do is bring it all together here. I think a framework for moderation is this. Firstly, it's up on the left there. Being really clear about those 4 points that keep coming through. Being clear about what overall teacher judgments are. What our common understandings are as a staff and a team. Using criteria and exemplars. So as each time you go through moderation, pick out some samples that really helped you clarify between those students that are either on the brink of a level or another level, or those ones that were just a little bit troublesome to decide. Use those ones as exemplars, as examples you can use next time to check your judgments or to clarify. If next time you find a clearer sample, replace it. So start building up those exemplars within your class, within your teams, within your schools. Then using some moderation processes, and we'll get to that in a moment. So attending to components of moderation up there in the green one, looking to those 4 key bits, the interpersonal skills, looking at the theoretical content knowledge, that's really knowing what it is about teaching mathematics or teaching English, looking for and deciding on a frame of reference that you as a staff will use for when you're doing the overall teacher judgments. You can use whatever you like in your classroom, but it's when you're doing those judgments, the coming to those overall judgments, that you're using a common frame. And then obviously attending to that ongoing learning so that people will acknowledge where they're unsure, so that then they can be open to new learning. Then moving round to the purple one is understanding and using moderation. And really it is about confirming or adjusting your judgments. It's that simple. Well, I wish, but in essence it is. And then the ultimate purpose of it all is to improve our learning and teaching. It's contributing to it. So let's optimise the opportunities that we have here in New Zealand to really focus on our teacher judgments, to look at where we're at now, where we want to go to, and where we want to lift our students' achievement and learning. So when we do that, we can have a coherent approach that links together our learning and teaching programs, our professional learning, our assessments, and link into our school planning and targets. I want you to now think about your school. Just think where your staff are at in terms of those 4 elements of moderation. Is there close collaboration? Is there are there 1 or 2 staff members who perhaps need a bit more confidence building? Because often if you have a bit of resistance or hesitation, underneath that is a bit of uncertainty, someone who's not feeling terribly secure. So they may need some more knowledge or some affirmation, or starting off in a safe place and then building up to where they can then be open to new learning. It may be there's more of that content knowledge, etc. I would suggest that you target your professional learning in 1 or 2 of those aspects. Start teachers with a trusted peer and just keep it simple, keep it doable. Start with some students. If they're lacking in confidence, start with a student's work that they're quite confident about. If they are open to some learning, then start with a child that's troubling them in terms of where they might put a judgment. You know, where a child's level 2 at this and level 4 at that, and over a matrix varies. That's where you get your really interesting debates and your deep learning. So if the staff are at a place where they're into the learning and open to those ideas, go for that. You don't have to moderate every student's samples of work. You don't have to do it right across the curriculum. Start in 1 curriculum area, start with either just 1 student, that one that you're not sure of, or start with 2 or 3. Don't try and do the whole class. It's far better to do it quality, spend deep time and deep conversation for 10-15 minutes of your staff meeting. Better to do that and really focus in on an area than try to do the whole lot. So that would be my advice. Then build up to comparing across teams, etc. Ensure in that mix of information, if you're doing overall teacher judgments, at least 1 normed reference tool. And the reason for that, it's kind of like an anchor point, because it helps you see where that child's at and where the students in your school and class are at compared with the national norms. So then you can see you're not drifting too far away from where it's at. Okay? And then obviously link into areas for ongoing professional learning and development. So how are we going for time? Great. We can open up now to a couple of questions from you about either what inspires you now about overall teacher judgments, or any issues you might be experiencing with moderation or OTJs that you want to discuss. And the other key one I haven't mentioned, but I think is very important, is the involvement of students in the process. You realise that students can, from the age of 2, can self-assess. So they can be involved in that whole assessment process. I know some people get a little bit confused when it's called OTJ, overall teacher judgments, as to where the students in. Ultimately, yes, as a teacher you come up with the ultimate judgment, but students do have a role to play. And it's amazing what you can learn even in a 30-second conversation about their perspective that'll give you another view on the work that you've done. So thank you for your time. I think it's time to hand over to Roz. So thank you very much.